Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to your daily sit rep for Wednesday, the 7th of January, 2026. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. We have a lot to cover today. Robert, good morning. Let's go ahead and jump inside the Beltway, starting with this comment that was made by President Trump yesterday. He said, no one should be surprised, but he did say it. If Democrats win the midterms, if they take power in the House, have a House majority, they will impeach me. I think that much is obvious. What else do we need to know?
So this was during a talk yesterday at the House GOP retreat at the Kennedy Center, and during excuse me, during this talk with the House Republicans, he called on them also to be flexible on healthcare and abortion because he's looking to increase the likelihood that the GOP retains the House in 2027. And as we said before, the base case is that Democrats flip the House this year, but it looks like the Trump administration, the White House, is trying to maximize their potential to hold on to the House in order to allow Trump's legislative agenda to continue moving forward.
Mm-hmm. And just briefly, Robert, I've heard from a great many Republicans who say abortion is probably the topic that has the highest moral significance, but is also one of the least popular planks of the Republican Party by moderates. And in a lot of these districts, Republicans need moderate votes who are maybe more liberal on abortion. Sure seems to be like a danged if you do, danged if you don't kind of thing. Politically, of course, I'm not talking about the moral case. At any rate, if you're a vulnerable Republican and you say the base Republican turnout in the midterms is probably not going to be high enough to have me keep my seat, and you do need some moderate support who are more liberal on abortion. I mean, what are you even supposed to do? Well, if you want to keep your seat, because here's the deal. Here's kind of the deal. If a Democrat takes your seat, you know they're going to be pro-abortion, and it seems like it's just a very tricky situation. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the Trump administration is trying to give flexibility to those purple seat or swing seat Republicans. He also told Republicans that they're just not getting the message about especially his economic policies out, which seems to be one of the big problems the Trump administration has had is on messaging. Yesterday, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent put out an announcement of the ushering in of the golden age. I think this is the start of this messaging campaign for Trump and the Trump administration because they're trying to turn out these low and mid propensity voters. And I think also the Venezuela operation and possibly an Iran operation are playing into this. Trump's trying to build up these quote easy military wins in order to build up public support because polling on those actually the support for operation to depose Maduro actually gained support after it happened. So I think this is part of a larger strategy by the Trump administration to hold on to the House is rack up these military wins without getting mired in counterinsurgencies and get more of this messaging out about his economic policies, as well as giving flexibility to Republicans.
Mm-hmm. So basically just have these vulnerable Republicans maybe not even say much about abortion and just campaign on. And by the way, if they're going to campaign on economic issues, it's even kind of difficult for Republicans to do that because we have this K-shaped economy where the top 25%, maybe the top 50%, like doing well, and then the bottom 50% just not doing well at all. It's the two right parts of the K, and so it seems a little bit disingenuous for the administration to come out and talk about this golden age when so many people are still struggling. Although I will say this, I will add this, we'll move on. You know, every Friday I do this economic early warning report for members, and I share with you what banks are telling their clients. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, some hedge funds, Citibank, Society Generale, Deutsche Bank, tons of like the big banks. They pretty much all say economic reacceleration next year. They are saying, I think Goldman Sachs even, I think they have above consensus GDP growth, which is good, maybe good for headlines if that actually does happen, but not so good if most of that GDP is going to the top half and not the bottom half. All right, so at any rate, let's go ahead and move on. Speaking of this House majority, it has now shrunk. What's the latest?
Correct, by one seat. So Representative Doug LaMalfa, who's a California Republican, unexpectedly died yesterday. And now House Speaker Mike Johnson only has 2 Republican votes he can lose and still pass bills. So this does narrow an already slim majority. This new map that California passed also makes LaMalfa's district lean Democrat. So there's the potential here that this can become a permanent seat that is Democrat. So California Governor Gavin Newsom has the potential to hold off a special election until August, effectively making this permanent, because when the November election rolls around, it's likely that a Democrat takes that seat.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then that would, so basically, House Speaker Mike Johnson can lose. He's got a 2-vote majority, so he can only lose 1 vote.
I think right now he's at this takes him down to a 3 seat majority, so he can only lose 2 and still pass a bill by a simple majority. This does
isn't there a Republican member of Congress that is currently absent for some health thing? I read that in Politico this morning, and we can get into the details later. But all this to say, very slim majority, and I think Johnson does have some big important bills coming up. Let's go ahead and move on here, because some key Trump administration officials, including Attorney General Pam Bondi, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Dan Kane, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, and CIA Director John Ratcliffe, are all scheduled to brief Congress this morning or at some point today on the Venezuela operation. And this is an intelligence briefing that will be closed to the public. We will certainly not learn all the details, but we may learn some later today. And then finally, Robert, finishing up here with Inside the Beltway, the Trump administration is going to slash these seasonal worker visas. What's the latest?
Yeah, this was quietly announced over the Christmas holiday. The Labor Department is only going to release 35,000 of these H-2B worker visas. These are seasonal visas that are used for like hospitality and construction workers. The program normally allows a maximum of 65,000 visas to be issued, so this is almost a 50% cut. And this is down from the Biden administration, which released almost all of these 65,000 visas every year from 2022 to 2025.
Mm-hmm. So roughly slash them in half. And then if you're a farmer in California, or you're growing strawberries in Texas or whatever, how is this going to potentially impact your harvest season? Are they just going to have to go and actually pay people livable wages to go do this farm work?
Well, the farmer visas are H-2A, and I think the Trump administration has been trying to push farmers to actually use those, because as far as I understand, most farmers don't even bother using the H-2A seasonal visas. They just hire illegal aliens. And I think, at least during the middle of last year, there was a few raids on different farms and food processing companies with the idea of, I think, pushing them to start utilizing those H-2A visas, because it is not very heavily utilized.
Mm-hmm. And then last question on this. Earlier or last year, a lot of Democrats banged the drum, and some were pretty outrageous about, we're going to have food shortages because there's going to be no workers, and all the people who work on the farms and pick your tomatoes and strawberries, they're going to be gone. They're going to be deported, and there's just trillions of dollars of food wasting away out under the sun on these farms because there's nobody out there to pick them, et cetera, et cetera. You know all the stuff that they said. Well, that didn't happen in 25. Is there any reason to believe that's going to happen in 26 as long as the Trump administration continues to deport illegals?
I don't think so, because there's so much of the U.S. farm economy that has focused on exports in the last couple of decades. So, from my understanding, basically farms run on very low margins, and one of the big pushes over the last roughly 30 years was a focus on exporting crops. And I don't think an illegal immigration push that even targeted farms is going to have a huge impact on domestic food availability.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well,
I think we lost Mike. So we'll move on to our next item. President Trump announced yesterday that that they're going to launch a fraud investigation into California, and is currently underway. This is, I think the Trump administration is going to use these accusations of federal money spending fraud at the state level as justification for more surges. This is what the Trump administration said was the justification for this recent increase in Operation Metro Surge. where they have deployed an additional 2,000 federal agents to Minnesota. The Trump administration is, for now, barred from deploying National Guard troops into some of these cities, but I don't think is likely to invoke the Insurrection Act ahead of the midterms. But as we reported, DHS has said they've hired an additional 12,000 ICE agents, and I think we could see in the near future a significantly larger surge into one of these California cities like San Francisco or Sacramento. California Assembly member Chris Ward, a Democrat, introduced Assembly Bill 1542, and this is going to ban the sale or sharing of all sensitive personal data in California, and this includes immigration status. Ward's also pushing forward a bill, AB 322, to ban the sale of geolocation data, which stalled last year in the California Assembly. Ward explicitly called out Trump immigration surges as the motivation for passing these bills. I think this is likely an attempt to preempt the Trump administration from purchasing some of this data, including immigration status and location, from private brokers. And we've also seen Palantir has engaged in some contracts with ICE and DHS, like Immigration OS, and the U.S. government has previously purchased this personal data from private brokers. So this is not an unprecedented move the Trump administration could make, and I think these bills are an attempt to preempt that. Moving over to Rhode Island lawmakers are now considering a 3% income surtax on residents with incomes higher than $640,000 per year. And a spokesman for the governor, Dan McKee, said that the governor is now also open to a wealth tax with an income threshold of $1 million per year. And this is really, I've seen multiple states do this. They're looking at some of these higher income and wealth taxes to make up for some of these federal spending cuts, because the states have become reliant on state rotating funds. And this is, I think, basically every state, not just blue states, in order to pay for their basic services. So they are looking, I think we're going to see an increase, especially in these blue states, of pushes for wealth taxes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, California has been going through this as well. They have the billionaire tax or whatever it's called, and so you have a bunch of these VC food. I mean, Peter Thiel left. I think a couple of other people, a couple of other tech billionaires have already left California over this wealth tax. And you know what this reminds me of? Several years ago, I think it was New Jersey that raised taxes on high net income people, and there was a guy who paid about $2 million in state taxes every year. And he picked up and he moved and he sold his home and I probably went to Florida. And I remember you had all these New Jersey politicians talking about they had immediately a $2 million budget shortfall, or at least a $2 million revenue shortfall now because one guy moved. And it's like these states, it's like they don't learn.
Well, I think this is, so there was a fight between Representative Ro Khanna and Gary Tan. He's the head of Y Combinator, which is one of these big VC tech accelerators,
startup.
Yeah. And over this fight, is over this billionaire tax. I think one of the reasons why you're seeing people like Ro Khanna, who previously was against a wealth tax, moving to support it, is because of this shift among younger voters, especially in the Democratic Party, toward more progressive and democratic socialist policies and candidates. I think some of these California or some of these other state level Democrats who previously would be moderate, like the Rhode Island Governor McKee, who last year came out against a wealth tax and against increasing income taxes, I think they're moving that way because that's where the Democratic voter base is moving in the future.
Sure seems to be the case. And speaking on that, Senator Elizabeth Warren recently donated $400,000 each to 23 state Democrat parties. If you just do the math, I believe that's about $9.2 million. And she's doing that, giving that money away to build out party infrastructure ahead of the 2026 midterms. She described those donations as, quote unquote, early money to states that she sees are crucial in helping Democrats win back the House in November. She said, quote, "They need money now to hire staff, recruit volunteers, knock on doors, make calls, do all the things that make Democrats competitive in these elections." And she added that their campaign messaging strategy against Republicans centers on the high cost of living for Americans. And she says, and Democrats have this wonderful plan to bring down prices. That is the strategy. Robert, we looked at historically, you just look at baseline, roughly 90% of midterm elections has resulted in the incumbent party losing power in the House 90% of the time, I think, over the past 16 election cycles. So midterm election cycles, pretty significant. On Polymarket the other day, the House majority flipping was up at like 79% or something like that. So pretty important. And at this point, actually, we're just talking about Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act before the show started. And I asked, will this ruling, how soon does this Supreme Court ruling have to be in order for the Supreme Court to basically direct the states to redraw their districts after they invalidate these majority-minority districts, and will it have any effect on the midterm elections? And you said coming up this Friday is potentially a day when the Supreme Court is going to release some new rulings, correct?
Correct. Yeah, normally they don't announce ahead of time which rulings they're going to release, but there is the potential that Voting Rights Act ruling could be released because they've already had 2 oral arguments, and it has been roughly 2 to 3 months since the last one. So it should be dropping within. I think it's likely to come Friday. And the timing of it, though, depends on the state. Some states they have until March or May to register for primary elections. So these states are going to need time to pass. Many of these states are going to need time to pass these new maps to their state legislatures before they can implement them for 2026.
Mm-hmm. Robert, it seems to me that the Supreme Court is going to rule against Section 2, or at least narrow the implementation of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. I would be extremely shocked if they say, and this also applies to the 26 midterms. It seems to me making this ruling even early in a midterm election year, they will just say, and this goes into effect in 2028, basically not giving Republicans any extra room for the midterms.
That's possible they do that because there's this doctrine called the Purcell principle. But normally what that means is federal courts, lower federal courts, do not even release rulings that could impact elections too close to the election. So that might be a reason why the Supreme Court would say that this does not take effect until 2028.
Right. Well, where I'm going with this is how this Supreme Court ruling, to which election cycle it applies, I think pretty heavily dictates how many extra Republican seats there will be going into the 26 midterms. And it seems to me, if the Supreme Court does make this ruling and have it apply to the 26 midterms, Republicans have a chance. If it doesn't go into effect until 28, I think Republicans basically have no chance, but we'll see. It's still really early. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. And we'll go ahead and move on to the global sit rep. Still a lot to cover. All right. So Jared, we've heard a lot from political pundits and geopolitical pundits that there's no such thing as the rule of law. And we're going back to the era of might makes right. And one thing that I have been saying on the show for a few years now, yes, we are reverting to the historical mean, and it's not just about power. And if you're a big country, you more or less not exactly do what you want, but you have a lot more leeway to act. That action, though, especially for the United States, is dependent on how much power we produce. Jared, being that, what's the latest here from Merck Investments? What did this guy say about power now driving markets?
So this is from Axel Merck, the president of Merck Investments. He told Kitco yesterday that efficiency no longer drives capital and that power now drives the markets. Toward the end, he warned that the danger is clinging to a post-World War II framework that simply doesn't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the post-World War II framework certainly does not exist. On that topic, we've also heard this. I've seen this predominantly from Europe. Basically, like, oh, Trump's a dictator. He just does what he wants now. And no country is safe. And we can do it to Maduro in Venezuela. So Petro needs to watch. And actually, kind of, Trump didn't do himself any favors on this. Although a lot of the things that Trump says about Cuba and Colombia and some other countries, I think it's pretty typical art of the deal stuff. You know, you start with a very extreme point and everyone freaks out. And then you slowly recede back to what you really want. And then it doesn't sound so extreme compared to the more extreme option. That's basically the Overton window in effect here. However, I have seen a lot of people say that Colombia's next and Cuba's next and Iran is next. And we're just going to go in and start knocking down these historical adversaries of the United States. Let's go ahead and move down to this. We'll cover the rest of this stuff. But on this topic, I want to go to this latest from the State Department saying we will eradicate rivals from the West because this is a handful of countries, and it's a dwindling list of countries, but they are here in the Western Hemisphere. What's the latest?
Yes, this was just a quick social media post from them, but it is reissuing a stance. They intend to eradicate adversaries, competitors, and rivals operating in the Western Hemisphere from here. Now, I think the main important thing here is that they are distilling the national security strategy down to a tweet. And as a warning again, if you didn't read it, we're still kicking you out. Get out now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they made that case when I saw Trump officials come out in their social media accounts say, this is our hemisphere. And basically what they're telling not only Chinese allies in the Western Hemisphere, but also China, is that we will own the Western Hemisphere, and we are going to, we may not be dictating everything in the Eastern Hemisphere, but we're going to continue to dictate what is strategically important to the United States and let go of everything else. And that seems to be the case. We will own the Western Hemisphere, and we will do what we need to do in the Eastern Hemisphere, and the world's just going to have to live with it. And if you're in America, you should say, yeah, that's probably a good thing for the United States. If you're outside of the American sphere of influence, it's a pretty stark message about really the future. So I just want to bring all this stuff home, which is I see a lot of people in geopolitics bemoaning the end. And it's almost like, and you have like the Tom Nichols and the David Fromms of the American, whatever you call them, geopolitical punditry class. And it's like they're longing for a world that just simply does not exist. And they're still trying to defend this international order as if it still exists. And this is not just a Trump thing. This was happening before Trump. We can even go back to Obama. And even they were talking about the post-American world. As a matter of fact, there's that very famous picture of Obama reading that book from Fareed, whatever his name is, called The Post-American World. And there was this sense that Obama was going to spend his 2 terms leading this graceful decline of America. And a lot of that fed into this idea that the American empire was going to collapse and we're going to zero, and it's like it's here, it's imminent. And that is not the picture that we're getting anymore. The picture we're getting from the national security strategy and also from the Trump administration, and also I would say from like the global macro financial folks, is we will simply dollarize the Western Hemisphere. We will own the Western Hemisphere, and that's the future of the American empire. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to some of these updates here from Venezuela.
Yep, a couple quick notes from Venezuela. ABC's reporting from sources familiar with the matter, so anonymous sources, that President Trump's demanding exclusive oil refining access out of Venezuela, along with Venezuela demanding a total severance of relations between Venezuela and China, Cuba, Iran, and Russia. That tracks perfectly with what the State Department is saying. And he also announced between 30 and 50 million barrels of high quality, between 30 and 50 million barrels of oil will be sent to the United States, which will then be sold at market price. And he does intend to use that to benefit both Americans and Venezuelans.
Yeah, that's what he said. Hey, Jared, on this topic, have you seen those reports about this apparently it's a flotilla of tankers? And I just saw this from some of the BRICS accounts on social media yesterday. So like the pro-Russian accounts basically saying there are Russian tankers and whoever's in this flotilla, and they're breaking the American blockade and they're going to Venezuela to load up with oil. That's one of the things that I saw. Did you see that? And if so, what's your take?
I've seen it, and if they get through, it is only think about the tyranny of distance issue. If they get through, they then have to travel thousands of miles through U.S. Navy controlled territory without getting boarded to get to their destinations. The blockade is functionally half of the earth. You're not really getting through it.
Okay. There's another thing. And apparently there's one tanker, and there's a lot of U.S. interest in it and a lot of Russian interest in it. And I've seen a number of people asking, What is on this tanker? Why is there so much attention being paid to this one ship coming out of Venezuela? And I don't know where it's headed to, and I don't know what's on it. But have you seen that? And what do you make of it?
I have seen it. That one was actually initially headed to Venezuela, and then turned around and ran when it was initially when the Navy started to board it. I personally don't think there's oil on it. It is an oil tanker. I don't think there's oil on it. I think there's something else illicit on there. I couldn't tell you what. But normally if there's look at the other oil tankers that were seized. They seized it. There was oil. It was sanctioned oil, so it was seized. Well, there's something here that cannot just be forfeit.
Mhm.
And then immediately reflagging, renaming underway. That tells me you are trying very desperately to not be seen. They probably changed their AIS, which is their automatic identification system. It reports to global networks. I am very excited to find out what's in there. Because I think that is going to be a game changer. It's just I can't tell you how it's going to change until I know what's in there.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the report that I saw was it already went to Venezuela and is trying to come out. But listen, I don't know. I haven't looked into it. But you're saying that this was en route to Venezuela, did not get there, and then tried to turn around.
If I could be wrong, there's been a lot, but what I remember was them heading toward Venezuela. The Navy attempted to board it, and they peeled off into the Atlantic.
Okay. All right. And there were reports also that Venezuela boarded up a bunch of silver and gold en route, I guess, maybe to Russia and or China as well in the days prior to last Friday's raid. All right. Thanks for that, Jared. Let's go ahead and move on wherever we are here.
Yep. A couple quick notes out of Asia. A Japanese official reported to the authorities he lost his phone in China, and this contains the names and contact details of staff members in Japan's Nuclear Regulations Authority, their security division specifically. So they are actually preparing for a potential breach of information here that could result in nuclear theft. That's the actual mission of that division. And then
the theft of nuclear
material. Yep.
Oh, nuclear material.
Yeah. They're Japan's not stoked about that right now. They're trying their best to lock everything down regarding their nuclear power.
Okay, so let me just get this right. There's a Japanese official. He worked for Japan's nuclear agency, whatever, nuclear security, and he goes to China. He loses his phone with a bunch of contacts.
Yes.
And now the Chinese have this list of staff members who work at the Nuclear Regulation Authority inside the National Security Division. And the fear is that the Ministry for State Security from China, basically Chinese
coercive theft,
foreign intelligence service, where the Foreign Intelligence Service part of the MSS is going to exploit that and go try to recruit these Japanese nuclear security officials to steal nuclear material.
Steal nuclear material, really even gaining access to Japan's nuclear power would be big, because that helps it in the event of a war. Japan being an overall importer of liquid natural gas, they could potentially shut that off. It's very difficult to do that with nuclear material because you just have it here. I think this could snowball quite quickly. I think this is a major security threat for Japan due to the fact that
this is nuts. Everybody knows when you go to a country like China, you leave all that stuff in your home country. You do not take any of your personal electronic devices. You get all brand new everything before you get there, literally nothing on it, straight out of the box. And maybe you have a small list of contact information for people in your coterie. And you don't, that's such a massive OPSEC and counterintelligence failure, Jared.
You want to know some crazier details about it?
Let's go.
All right. Well, so in the report, the official was given the phone as an official phone that he must carry on him at all times, and he did not notice it was gone for 3 days. And then he reported it to the Japanese authorities. So this likely has accesses that are not normal to phones. The Japanese did say, hey, we have not detected a breach. We have not noticed any kind of illicit use of this phone, but we also cannot remotely remove any data because it's too far away.
Yeah. And then when did this happen?
November.
Okay. Yeah,
Early November.
That's still a pretty quick turnaround if you're going to try to go in and recruit. I mean, potentially. Okay. All right. Thanks for that update. Let's move on to some notes on Taiwan.
Yes. So, in an assessment of China's response to the U.S.'s capture of Maduro, a Chinese professor of international relations at a university in Beijing said taking over Taiwan depends on China's developing but still insufficient capability rather than what Trump did in a distant continent. And I think that is probably the most honest assessment we've seen out of China. Normally, it's we can do this whenever we want. Here, you have one of their experts who they do rely on for actually assessing things, saying, no, we do not have the capability to take it right now. That is an incredible statement coming out of China, especially from a university in Beijing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a fair point. Whenever I see those kinds of statements, especially from Chinese officials, there is obviously like the counterintelligence part of me that says, maybe let's not take that at face value. So, however, Jared, that is what we've heard from American officials, from some European officials, from Taiwanese officials, Japanese officials. Pretty much everyone is saying something like that.
Yep. Absolutely. Okay. We've been saying it here for a couple of years now. Is they don't have it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thanks for that. Anything else to add here?
Nope.
All right, great. Let's go ahead and move over to the Homeland Ops brief. Robert, welcome back. Go ahead.
So, according to some local media reports, ICE is focusing on smaller and faster raids in Minnesota as this surge in the federal operations in Minneapolis and St. Paul have accelerated. This appears, I think, is additional evidence that we've seen this strategy change happening over the last year. And this is an attempt to preempt some of these local activist rapid response groups' ability to disrupt these raids. Specifically, they've been using rapid response groups to conduct direct action demonstrations and de-arrest attempts. I think we're likely to see this strategy change going forward with other federal surges this year, because this allows ICE and CBP to conduct higher tempo operations and leave the scene of a raid or arrest before any of these activists can respond. ICE is also using Customs and Border Protection's Mobile Fortify app. And this is a facial recognition app that allows them to identify people during encounters in the field. And DHS said that they have used this app in more than 100,000 arrests so far. And the intent behind it is to help speed up arrests and cut down on detentions of people with legal immigration status. And I think this is also part of this change in strategy, because this allows them to minimize the amount of time that they are spending at these raids in order to confirm the identification of detainees and get away from the scene before they can have these crowds form. This was one of the problems they ran into specifically in Minneapolis last year. Yesterday, ICE Acting Director Todd Lyons said that this is the largest immigration operation ever that is now underway in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And he confirmed also that ICE and Homeland Security investigation agents are going door to door to businesses suspected of hiring illegal aliens, which is a significant shift from some of the rhetoric the Trump administration was putting out last year about minimizing work site raids. I think this is possibly influenced by some of these people, Heritage Foundation figures around the administration. I think we talked about a few weeks ago, there was a paper put out by one of the Heritage Foundation immigration people in November last year that called on the Trump administration to expand these work site raids. And then finally, Hilton cut ties with that Minneapolis hotel over the hotel denying reservations from DHS yesterday. Apparently, a video was published after Hilton said that this was resolved that showed that the hotel was still denying reservations to ICE and CBP agents. I think this is an important development, because during the first Trump administration, I think at even the national level, companies like this would have told the Trump administration that they are going to continue to do this, and they actually support what is effectively disrupting the capacity of the Trump administration to conduct these federal surges. I think there's still likely to be future attempts to target immigration enforcement capacity by pressuring these local businesses to deny service. But I think this is also a sign of an increase in the influence of some of these independent journalists. This video that prompted Hilton to cancel the franchise for this hotel was actually, I believe, Nick Sorter, one of those independent journalists who has been following these ICE surges for the last few months. And I think this is showing, one, the growing influence on some of these 80-20 issues like immigration, because this is also a similar dynamic that prompted this 2,000 agent surge into Minnesota.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. And it does seem like we have maybe turned the corner on some of this stuff regarding corporations and their either acquiescence, not their support, but their acquiescence versus their resistance to stuff like this. And it seems like it's no longer in vogue to come out and just if you're a corporation, to openly flaunt these Trump administration policies. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. Let's go ahead and move on here to the last note here on Taiwan. Jared, this is a report. First of all, who is this from? GMF?
Yep, the German Marshall Fund.
Okay. And they did so they're a defense think tank or something like that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
so they did this assessment, and they say, as it stands right now, if this kicked off tomorrow, the Chinese would lose 100,000 in the process of trying to take over Taiwan. It would cost, $10 trillion in losses or something like that?
Yes, they would. They estimate that they would lose 100,000 troops, just outright dead, along with several 100,000 additional casualties. And due to sanctions, export stoppages, and a loss of foreign direct investment, they would lose $10 trillion almost immediately. So just catastrophic to their economy and to their people.
Well, let me add, okay, so I get if there's a stock market crash or a major sell-off. A problem for a lot of these multinationals doing business in China, good luck getting your money out of China unless it's on some payment rails that China does not control.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, basically that's the issue.
Yes, they are expecting that. I've got it down here in my notes. Basically, sanctions would stop a lot of exports from them, which makes up 20% of their total GDP. They also have a pretty significant lull in domestic demand as well, so they can't really make that up. And the foreign direct investment, I think they said that was $3.6 trillion heading into it. So that would also stop. It just adds up rapidly due to, hey, we're sanctioning you.
Mm-hmm. All right. So a couple of years ago, Citadel Investments. Oh, what's that guy's name? Ken Griffin, hedge fund manager over at Citadel, said if the U.S. lost TSMC, we no longer got their semiconductors, then we would be looking at a 5 to 10% decrease in GDP, basically overnight. The picture that I'm getting is if or when China decides to do this, it is potentially going to be catastrophic for the Chinese and American economy, really the whole global economy.
Yes.
I would say the global economy, if your economy is dependent on advanced technology.
Yes.
Okay.
It'll be catastrophic for everybody, but I think the case they're really making here is it'll be far more catastrophic for China. And they point that out. They demonstrate that through one particular follow-on effect. They expect that in a loss of a major war, the degraded relations between the Chinese Communist Party, the People's Liberation Army, and the Chinese public would fall to the point of the PLA demanding a new leader at a minimum, potentially even a new form of government. This is their assessment, and that's due to the massive loss of face, trying to invade a country and failing to as a supposed superpower. And they think that they would actually have a popular support with both of those options as well.
Mm.
Now,
there was a lot of when Xi Jinping had his historic expansion of his term, there's a lot of talk about this being Xi's legacy, and he wants to get done with this before the end of his term, which I think is up in 2028 or somewhere around there, 27, 28, something like
27.
that. Okay. And so there was this kind of foregone conclusion that Xi Jinping was going to do this by the end of his term in order to cement his legacy. And it was treated by some as a foregone conclusion. But we are hearing from a great many defense think tanks and apparently even some Chinese officials, definitely Taiwan officials and definitely American officials, that this is not going, we knew it was not going to be easy for China. But in fact, this seems, well, in assessment, this seems to be so difficult for China that you have a lot of people actually wondering if this is actually going to happen. Given that, if Xi fails to take Taiwan, he's done, and his legacy is embarrassment. And is this going to be another century of humiliation for China rather than the, what do they call it, the national rejuvenation?
Yeah, the Chinese rejuvenation.
Yeah, right. But that's the picture that we're getting, correct?
Absolutely. And now this assessment does offer a minor conflict scenario, but they acknowledge in it, yeah, China does not control escalation here. That's in Japan and America's hands, and we've previously discussed that. I don't think it'll stay at a minor conflict. And I think ultimately this is to warn China, because they can see these just as well as anybody else. This is to warn them, they cannot afford to lose the conflict. They cannot control the conflict. They're unlikely to win it, and it would simply be better to not attempt to take Taiwan. Just leave the status quo alone. That's, frankly, this is the same thing China's been trying to do to Taiwan, where they sway opinions against China from the West. And I think this is a much stronger case than what China is trying to make.
Mm-hmm. The other part of this, the other reason why this is so important in light of what's going on now, is we've talked a lot about the national security strategy, Fortress North America, hardening the Western Hemisphere, the Monroe Doctrine, basically this new version of Monroe Doctrine. We're kicking the Chinese and Russians, or at least in the process of doing that as much as possible, out of the Western Hemisphere. But you look at Venezuela, you look at these protests with Iran, and by the way, it's so difficult. I see stuff coming out of Iran, and I don't know what's true and what's not, but there was a report yesterday that the protesters took over their first town in Taiwan. Basically, they kicked out the local government. They're in charge. That's just a report that I saw on one of the Middle East accounts on social media. And of course, I don't know if that's true or not, but it is plausible. And if that Times report from the UK is true, that the leadership in Tehran is making contingency plans to leave in case this protest turns into basically a color revolution or popular revolution, something, if it's successful, then the picture that we're seeing, obviously, is this. It's not just a Monroe Doctrine in the Western Hemisphere. It's a grand strategic doctrine of denying oil to China. Remember, this is grand strategy, connecting yourself to as many power centers as possible while simultaneously disconnecting your opponent from as many power centers as possible. And if we are cutting Venezuela and potentially cutting Iran, if those two things actually are associated, then it seems like part of our grand strategy, I guess part of the thing is, this is almost like a counter to China, that we tell China, that's fine. If you want to control rare earth minerals and you want to cut the United States off from these things that we need, we will cut you off from oil. And I guess we'll play a game of chicken over that, Jared.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've discussed previously the blockade that could be run too. It does not look like it would be difficult due to the choke points that are in the area. And now the U.S. Actually, do you mind if I back up real quick to that infographic of the oil?
Go ahead.
So here, the top line there is Venezuela's $300 billion.
Well, just real quick, Jared. I saw, and listen, I'm not an oil and gas guy, so I got to look at what oil and gas people are saying. However, let me just, there's maybe credible reason to believe that Venezuela does not actually have 300 billion barrels of oil. And I will walk you through. You saw that?
I have seen questioning about it, but I haven't seen anybody talk about it.
I'll walk you through it. So this number is based on some international whatever assessment. And what is that assessment based on? What's based on some other assessment? And the details escape me. But basically, there's this oil and gas guy walking us through this. And basically, you track back you basically do like, your Y3 or Y5 analysis and track this number back all the way to the source. And the source is based off an estimate that was conducted by back when Chavez was in power. Chavez is the one who said they had $300 billion barrels or 300 billion barrels of oil. And what is that based off of? I'm not sure it's based off any external assessment. So basically what I'm saying is Venezuela claims to have 300 billion. Has that been confirmed? That is the big question. According to this one oil and gas guy, this assessment that's been used by financial analysts and outlets and geopolitical analysts and pretty much the whole world over, it may be false. Maybe they don't have 300 billion. So I'll just throw that out there, but please continue, Jared.
That, you know what? That is a fantastic caveat to that. So point I was going to make is that, the United States now has a controlling share over the world's oil. That may not be true, but at the very least, one of China's sources of oil is now cut off. I've seen plenty of people discussing in the chat that it's not going to happen. Like, okay, well, you still have to get through the fleet that's over in the Pacific to get to China. This is functionally cut off. And China was able to get it at a pretty great price just because Venezuela was locked out of anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Jared, on this topic, something that I meant to mention on Monday. There's somewhere between $60 and $100 billion in Chinese BRI investment, Belt and Road Initiative investment in Venezuela. The future of that investment is potentially in question. Another reason to be very upset if you're China, because basically President Trump just told Venezuela, cut all ties with Russia and China. And are they going to default then on those loans? Basically here, China was selling oil in return for loan reduction. They're basically paying off at a certain level, paying off some of these loans in oil. And now that is potentially gone because Trump said, yeah, sure, we'll sell Venezuelan oil to China in dollars. I mean, that's $60 or $100 billion potentially of debt that is erased. And so I would just throw that in there. This is another kind of, I'm not sure that it necessarily complicates the calculus of the administration, but at some level there may be a tit for tat. Maybe China threatens to sell off its remaining U.S. treasuries if Venezuela reneges on this BRI debt. I don't know. At any rate, anything to add there?
Yeah. Every time we talk about China having to get Trump forcing China to come back on the dollar, every time I hear that, I think about the deep dive that we did on China's monetary collapses over the past, I think it was 1,000 years. And it just the dollar dependency to me sounds like when they were dependent on Spanish silver, because the moment you pull that away, they had a whole dynasty change, not just a regime change. That's a threat they've got to be aware of. And that's increasing the power of that weapon by forcing them back on the dollar.
So, all right, you said they were dependent on Spanish silver. That would have been around the Ming to Qing dynasty.
Sounds right, yeah.
Yeah, like mid to late 1600s. Okay, yeah, all right, interesting. So, what was the number, Jared? Basically, there's some level of collapse or regime change or revolution in China every 150. How many years was it?
I'd have to go back and double check it.
But it was like 100 or 200 years, right?
Yeah, it was ahead of when the empires normally fall per John Glubb. But basically every time they had an issue with their money, and they've had paper money for ages, every time they had an issue with their money, it resulted in a regime change, if not a dynasty change.
Okay, interesting. All right, thanks for that, Jared. And we do have some questions and also some comments that I want to get through. There's some things that are said in the chat that we certainly don't agree with. Trump seems to be lining up a scenario where he cancels elections for this year. I don't see that at all. That's the talking point. Thank you for furthering that talking point, which is I think a baseless accusation here. Trump's special military operation. By the way, sir, what country are you from? I just got to ask. Trump's SMO are going to expand. Trump is showing Putin how easy it is to invade a smaller country. Well, invading Ukraine has not been that easy for Russia. it will not even be easy for the United States. There's a big difference in going in and taking out a single bad guy, or in this case, going in to arrest Maduro, and having boots on ground, an actual large-scale military operation. No one wants to get mired in that in Venezuela. No one wants to have an Iraq in the Western Hemisphere that speaks Spanish. Nope. No, excuse me. Nobody wants to do that. So I don't see it that way. I don't think that's going to happen. Although I will say the future of Venezuela, I think, is still very much in the air. We put Maduro on regime change watch, back in September or so, Jared, August, September timeframe?
August, yeah.
Yeah, back in August. And we said, look, this Navy buildup in the Caribbean, it's obviously off baseline. And then they sailed that carrier strike group from the Mediterranean down to the Caribbean off the coast of Venezuela. And we said, we're not doing that for nothing. And even before, was that the Iwo Jima? Jared, what ship is that down there?
Yeah, there was the Iwo Jima Amphibious Readiness Group, so Iwo plus her 2 escorts, and then there were four surface combatants, including 2 cruisers, which are air defense platforms by their nature. And then they sailed in the strike group, and there were rumors of a nuclear submarine being down there as well. That was never confirmed, but also you won't really know where those are until something happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, point being, and even the Friday before the Friday before that raid, like, whatever, 15, 16, 20 hours before, I said, Maduro's gone. Maduro's out. He just hasn't left the country. And then, roughly 20 hours later, he was definitely gone. All right, with that. Oh, yeah. So the point I was going to make is the future of Venezuela is still very much in the air. A lot of people have said in the chat and noted elsewhere that the communists are still in charge, and that is true. And I'm sure there's I would say a hope. I'm not sure exactly what the plan. Maybe there's a concept of a plan. I don't know exactly what they have at the Pentagon, but you would think they would have at least a concept of a plan. I hope. Anyway, there still has to be a lot of shuffling, and ultimately, the future of Venezuela. I think this is kind of the crux of the problem here. Trump can come in and say, yeah, we're going to rebuild Venezuela, and we're going to sell Venezuelan oil, and we're going to do all this stuff. We're going to sell it in dollars to China. And the problem is you have people still running that country who are part of that regime. And so there's obviously I would say the decisive point potentially coming up is if Venezuela does have free and fair elections at some point in the next 6 to 12 months. And then if voters feel confident enough, and there actually are free and fair elections, to say, man, we don't want to live under communism anymore. What do the communists do? Knowing that historically, there will be some form of truth and reconciliation. So, which is basically where they go and investigate the previous regime and arrest a bunch of people and try a bunch of people for crimes against humanity. Same thing Democrats are talking about doing with Project 2029, by the way. You'll forgive me if I think the communists probably will just not walk away from power and hand it over to some more or less right of center or conservative right-wing president. All right, moving on. So lots to come. We're going to be following this for a long time. Trump seems reluctant to aggressively pursue controversial anti-corruption policies in government before the 26 midterms to avoid backlash. After the midterms, will the 28 presidential race create similar delays? Is there ever an ideal window for bold action on such decisive agendas, or does electoral caution perpetually hinder them? Well, Robert, let's bring you on. So I do see, obviously, there is a risk doing this before the 26 midterms. At the same time, that's why we elected the guy, to go after all the corruption. And Pam Bondi shuffling her feet, writing letters, and we've seen, I think, very few. And have we seen a single indictment of one? I guess we have. We saw Comey and Letitia James. Those are up in the air. Briefly, what's the latest on those?
Yeah, as far as I understand, the Trump administration appealed. That basically it came down to the district court said that the U.S. attorney's appointments were illegal or they were no longer lawfully U.S. attorney. This all comes down to a lot of these appointments are being held up in the Senate by the Senate Republican majority, but they are appealing that decision in order to continue those indictments. And there's also the former CIA director who is currently being investigated in Miami. As far as I understand, the Trump administration is doing a lot of this investigation work and this grand jury stuff down here in Florida in the Southern District. But I think it's a combination of one. It might be consideration for the midterm in order to not appear or give fuel to the accusations that Trump's trying to steal the midterm by targeting some of these Democratic officials like Letitia James. But all the other part is also a lot of these federal legal proceedings just take time. Like the courts move pretty slowly.
Sure. Well, I think that's a fair point. So it would seem that this more hinges on the amount of time it takes to actually investigate and indict rather than this being a consideration for the midterms.
I think that is more likely. Just it takes a lot of time for these things to work. Not just the investigation, but also moving through the courts. Plus, they have to get past a lot of these district judges that appear over the last year to be out to disrupt this legal agenda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, if anything, this may be a boost for Republicans going into the midterms if they did get a conviction by a jury of whoever's peers. If they did get a conviction on corruption or violating federal law at whatever level it's going to happen, I would say that may actually be winning the sales of Republicans in terms of people who want to clear house. And so, all right, anything else to add there? Or
no?
Okay. Although we will. It is very plain to see, even if they did get a conviction, you would have some establishment Democrats say, "Oh, look, this was a kangaroo court. This is more, we're basically living in Venezuela." All right. Thanks for that, Robert. Moving on, Jared. So we talked about that tanker earlier, and allegedly, maybe we seized a tanker 30 minutes ago. I don't know. We were on the show, so I didn't see it.
I saw that there was some movement toward it. Looks like I've got something to look into after the show.
Okay. All right. And then this is kind of outside our orbit, no pun intended, but Kessler syndrome, basically space trash and debris in low Earth orbit, increasing the risk of collisions. I don't know, Jared, you've got some knowledge of space. I don't know what the question is exactly here.
Yeah, basically this is talking about a domino effect of, hey, once you cause one satellite to go, it's going to spread out and wipe out a huge portion, if not the rest of the satellites in low Earth orbit.
Let me ask you this. If the United States and China were to go to conflict over Taiwan in 2027, that would obviously include some form of space warfare, and you would have the potential for knocking satellites out of orbit and potentially creating space debris. And I've seen some people talk about it may be so messy up there that every satellite we send into low Earth orbit is going to risk at some level, at some point, risk hitting a speck of dust and being obliterated because it's going so fast. Not a speck of dust, but yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, actually, not much larger. The microsatellites that have been put up, where they're fairly small, but they're still moving at incredible speeds, and if it's a head-on, that could still cause major issues. What I was going to say is that the Space Force and the Department of Transportation and Department of Commerce are all tracking this. They're all actually making plans about this. We covered this in 2023, I believe, when they had a whole conference with representatives from each one of them talking about the authorities for dealing with space traffic. That will include preventing the Kessler syndrome issue.
Okay. Next question is, would giving up on Taiwan for now be an existential threat to Xi staying in power? So Xi is running out of options. He either gets another term, and apparently there's a lot of internal dissension against him because he keeps firing these generals. And I'm sure some of those generals are corrupt, but it sure seems like he's sidelining potential opponents. I guess he could give up his presidency and name a successor, or there will be a successor named one way or the other. He will not have fulfilled his, I think what a great many people assess as his kind of culminating achievement, which is getting Taiwan. But the alternative is they try and they fail, and then his legacy is gone forever.
Yes. And so I do think the CCP believes Xi's credibility and legitimacy are tied up to Taiwan. He's made it from the time he took office in 2012. He laid out a plan on how to achieve Chinese rejuvenation. First step was basically reincorporating the close territories of China and ultimately dealing with every empire that was part of the spheres of influence under China's center of humiliation. That said, he was just supposed to be the first step. It doesn't look like he's going to be able to accomplish it. And I'm going to briefly present an idea that is not mine. Some Chinese insiders have said that they think Xi Jinping may not actually be totally in power anymore due to the, frankly, impossibility of taking Taiwan on his timeline. And there is historical precedence to having what they're calling a soft coup. Basically, you stay in power, but you do not have authority, where Hong Guofa had something similar happen under Deng Xiaoping. I want to explore that a lot more before I put a lot more stock into it, but it does help explain some of the things that we've seen recently out of there. So I want to, can we hang on to this question for quite a few months? Because I want to explore that a lot more before giving a good answer on this.
Okay, fair enough. All right, we do have a few other things here. To get through. Hey, can you repost that one for the question about DFW from Elsie? I accidentally hit the wrong button.
Yeah, let me find it.
All right. How bad is the state of Venezuela's refineries, and how long would it take to get them up to a full operating condition? So, I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, I can't tell you how bad, but bad. And I think Trump said in the past couple of days, it's going to take about 18 months just to get the oil companies back into Venezuela. And that's probably 18 months from the time of agreement, whatever agreement they strike with the current president or whoever's really ruling the country. And then 3 to 5 years after that, they said they could basically rebuild things. I think that's unlikely. I think 5 to 10 years is probably a lot more likely, but we'll see. We'll see. If it's a national priority and, you have highly competent engineers and planners and managers overseeing that, yeah, maybe 3 to 5 years. So there you go. 3 to 5 years plus a year and a half, roughly. We'll do 2 more questions and then we'll jump off. What are the main challenges, legal, political, and security, in removing entrenched Chavistas without sparking further instability? How will this be achieved? Well, Ben, I think a lot of this hinges on, if you're the Trump administration, you cannot do this illegitimately. Maybe they will. I tend to doubt that they will just come in and say, all right, whoever's left over from the Maduro regime, you're no longer in charge. We have this government in waiting. They're in power now. The only reason why they would do that is if there were overwhelming support and they had support of some of where they have 1,000 or 2,000 generals or something like that down there. Basically, if they had enough support of enough people with power and influence to say, yeah, we're going to recognize this new transitional government, then yes, maybe they would do that. I mean, ultimately, I think you have to work towards elections there because elections confer legitimacy. And so how will that be achieved? I'm guessing through elections. I'm kind of hoping through elections. If you're Trump, you do not want to get bogged down in any kind of internal conflict like an insurgency. And it's very possible, if not highly likely, that's exactly what will happen in Venezuela if there is some illegitimate process of selecting a new government. We'll leave it at there. This is a big topic, and I would like to spend a lot more time on this, looking into Venezuela and assessing the insurgency potential. I will just tell you it's very high off the bat. And in the future, I got to finish up a couple projects first, and then hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll be able to give you a much better answer, Ben. All right, and then finally, let's talk about this Dallas Galleria in Fort Worth schools yesterday. There were some threats. Fort Worth police said it's non-credible threat posted from overseas, but as of this morning, FBI has taken over. Robert, I saw this, I think, yesterday. I didn't look into it, but foreign bomb threats or foreign threats are nothing new. They've been happening for a long time. You got any details?
Yeah, I saw that. I think they were posted to Instagram or Telegram, and yeah, it appears to be some likely originated from Europe. And there were previously talking about some of these groups, these online groups like 764, the Com and stuff. They would take money to do some of these bomb threats. That was a big campaign they did last year, was doing bomb threats to like government buildings and schools, and school shooting threats for cash, basically. And there's a potential that this is something like that.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. Okay. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. And that's going to do it for today's briefing. We appreciate you joining us. Thanks for spending a part of your morning with us. We will be back in your inbox tomorrow morning, back on the show starting at 08 Central Time. Until then, be well and stay out front.